The Reading Pagoda, for nearly 120 years a beacon to generations of us who have called Reading and Greater Berks County home. What's its story? How does such a unique Japanese structure end up on a mountain in Pennsylvania? What's happening now? You have likely noticed the building has been closed and in need of millions of dollars worth of repairs. And maybe most importantly, what's next? How can we navigate the future of this building and bring it into the 21st century for our children and grandchildren? My name is Alexa. I joined the board of the Foundation for the Reading Pagoda back in January, and I'm going to answer these questions and more while I walk you through the inside as it looks today. The Reading Pagoda is by far the most iconic structure in Berks County, and one of the most unique tourist destinations in Pennsylvania. I have mentioned before that it is the only structure of its kind in the United States, which has been met with a bit of skepticism. Our pagoda is the only one in the world with a fireplace and chimney. The stone base, while not atypical of authentic Japanese pagodas, was constructed with Pennsylvania fieldstone from the quarry which once stood on its site. These two elements make it an almost perfect blend of Japanese and Pennsylvania Dutch, which in its own way is unlike anything else out there. Google will tell you there are two other peace pagodas in the US, in San Fran and New York, but neither look similar to ours or rival the size and scope. Beyond that, ours is the oldest currently standing. Have no doubt, it is indeed an anomaly. One of our tasks as the foundation has been sorting through and cataloging everything inside the pagoda, designating which things will go into storage for the duration of construction and what should be returned, as well as what can be thrown away. As we're walking through, you're going to see cuts of some of the same rooms with everything as it was left when the pagoda closed during COVID, as well as emptied. I feel like this contrast gives you some idea of the work that was involved for both the foundation and the city to prepare for construction. But before we talk too much about what's going on today, let's step back into the past and find out why it's here in the first place. The August 10th, 1906, Reading Eagle published an article titled "Mount Penn Will Have Japanese Pagoda." It explained that City Councilman William Abbott Whitman would be constructing the novel building as a summer resort on the site of his former quarry. Whitman's life and career are worth the subject of its own article, which you can read linked in the description. As some context as to why Whitman would decide to build such a unique structure, you need to understand that he was a very controversial and not well-liked figure by the time this article ran in 1906. At the same time, Whitman was on trial to lose his city council seat for 2 counts of conspiracy as alleged by the Taxpayers League. William, who owned the quarry with his brother John, entered into a contract with the city in the summer of 1905 to provide truckloads of stone for street paving and other projects. On one hand, it was seen as unethical that a councilman's business would be used for city projects, and obtaining it through his brother was kind of a shady way of doing so. In addition to that, there was discrepancy between the weight of the loads and the amount paid, William's involvement, and a convenient loss of receipts. Ultimately, Whitman was found guilty in local courts, but appealed his way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, where he was also found guilty and made to forfeit his position on council. Not only were the people of Reading annoyed with having their view of the Mount Penn blighted by an ugly quarry, it was also a constant reminder of the shenanigans occurring in their local government. Whitman, probably feeling the heat, decided to turn the quarry into a beautification project. Determined to not let this trial undermine his position in the public eye, he also announced his campaign to run for Reading's mayor in December of 1907. He lost in the Democratic primary. It would be the first of many unsuccessful attempts to run for Reading's mayor. The building was completed in 1908 at a cost of $50,000 and allegedly modeled after Nagoya Castle, a battle fortress in Japan. Whitman, looking to use the building as a resort, wanted to obtain a liquor license. he was met with much resistance from the community. In February of 1909, 619 Reading citizens signed a petition to block him. Their reasoning was, a hotel is not necessary at that point for the traveling public, and that the sale of intoxicants at the proposed stand would tend to make the pagoda a terminus for parties seeking liquors. It goes to say that women and children won't frequent that section of the boulevard for outings and walks, and that these pleasure trips would have to be stopped if that place was licensed. It is important to remember that the property in which the pagoda sits was originally in Lower Alsace Township. Whitman's defense in this was that only citizens of the township where the license is sought should be able to petition it. Whitman provided a counter-petition of 125 Lower Alsace residents who were in favor of the license being granted. It is also worth noting that the Summit House Hotel, which was due north of the pagoda up Skyline Drive, would have been licensed and serving during this time. Despite this, Whitman was refused a license officially a few weeks later. It is merely speculation, but it seems to me like this manufactured roadblock was personal. You may or may not have heard rumors of the pagoda being used as a brothel of sorts. I have absolutely no documentation to confirm this, but I do have it under good authority that there is indeed truth to this. I imagine it was most likely a place those who knew Whitman could go for a quick private room rather than a formally ran establishment. Whether that was the original intent or a consequence of not gaining a liquor license to do an honest business is anyone's guess. Regardless, this must have been a very short affair, as Whitman would only own the building for roughly 3 years before selling it at a loss. Whitman would default on his mortgage for the structure, and it was sold to Jonathan Mould on December 23, 1910 for nearly half of what Whitman paid to build it. Only 4 months later, on April 21, 1911, Mould deeded the building to the city of Reading. Jonathan Mould was born in New York, but moved to Reading in 1871 to manage his hometown's goods store that was branching into Pennsylvania. After that business was sold, he opened his own dry goods store on Penn Street in 1887 called J. Mould & Co. Mould also served as a director for Farmers National Bank, through which he would end up owning the pagoda as the bank financed Whitman's mortgage. Mould's gift to the city was an overture of his efforts at conserving the untamed land around it. In 1914, he founded the Berks County Conservation Society, which held its first ever meeting inside of the pagoda. This was a pioneering move, as at the time the conservancy movement in the United States was in its infancy. The organization's efforts were instrumental in ensuring the rest of Mount Penn went untouched by development. Beyond that, the organization planted trees to cover up the deforestation caused by Whitman's quarry. Believe it or not, this isn't the first time the pagoda has sat closed for a number of years. After obtaining ownership, the city didn't get around to opening the building to the public until over 3 years later. Immediately, they had to make a number of improvements to the building. The water pressure was lacking, so the city needed to lay a new pipeline from a water main. They also installed electricity and had to furnish the building, as it was completely empty. It was dedicated officially on September 5, 1914 by Jonathan Mould. That's not Mould's ghost, that's our foundation president, Joey. You might be aware that a dawn church service is held each Easter morning at the William Penn Memorial Fire Tower up Skyline Drive. This tradition actually began in 1914 at the pagoda. It was held here annually until 1937 when it moved to the fire tower to accommodate a growing crowd. In 1917, it was reported in the Reading Times that the Boy Scouts were using red and white lights atop the pagoda to signal Morse code messages. The Reading Police Department began using the pagoda as a substation in 1920, and the March 26th Reading Times reported that people arrested in that vicinity were held in the basement of the pagoda until the morning when they could be taken downtown. I feel like this is a good omen.
That's kind of creepy to look at here and just see, like, you don't see the city because of the fog.
Yeah, it is weird. The police also used the beacons from the pagoda to send urgent Morse code messages to other officers stationed around the city. The city applied for a license to begin broadcasting a radio station from inside the pagoda in March of 1923. In 1941, the road leading up the mountain from City Park, formerly called Pagoda Road, was renamed Duryea Drive in honor of Charles E. Duryea, a local pioneer automobile manufacturer. During World War II, times were tumultuous. In March of 1942, the city ordered that the pagoda's lights would be blacked out for the duration of the war, lest it serve as a guide for enemy airmen. Citizens wrote to council and asked them to tear it down, as it represented a culture that was killing our servicemen in the war. The original wooden balconies that surrounded the pagoda had rotted and were unsafe for public use. The wooden balconies were replaced by the current stone porches in 1949. In 1960, modern red neon tube lighting replaced the old incandescent light bulbs which had lined its eaves. Unfortunately, the new lighting didn't stand up well against the elements that the pagoda faces being on top of a mountain, and they were burnt out or damaged within a couple years of being installed. A scathing letter published in the Reading Eagle in 1965, which was titled "Neglected Pagoda." The writer noticed that the pagoda's exterior neon lighting was turned off at 11 o'clock every night, when the proprietor of the gift shop leaves the premises because it would not be safe to leave them burning when no one was around. Apparently, there were also several roof tiles missing. The roof leaks bringing with it all the threats commonly associated with that kind of carelessness. Things reached critical mass in the summer of 1969. A gaping hole opened in the parking area, and a retaining wall deteriorated and fell as a result of heavy rain. Due to this dire need of repairs, a new citizen organization formed that same year. Initially called Save the Pagoda Skyline Committee, eventually it became just Pagoda Skyline, Inc. Their first brainstorming sessions produced plans to develop the mountain. These ideas included a freestanding glass elevator on the east side of the pagoda for access to all the floors, and a chairlift from City Park to ride up the mountain. Electrical issues would prove to be nearly catastrophic. Around 10:45 p.m. on the evening of November 3, 1969, a short circuit sparked a fire which damaged the eastern side and eaves on the second story of the structure. Luckily, Glenn Miller, who leased the building from the city, was closing up for the night and smelled the smoke. One can only imagine how much may have burned had no one been there. By September of 1970, Pagoda Skyline, Inc. announced a $1.2 million improvement project with a tentative completion date of 1975. It included new electrical, repainting the exterior, and updates to the interior. In 1971, 20 new lion's heads were cast for each corner of the eaves. Again, the pagoda was darkened in 1973 under Nixon's request for conservation during the energy crisis. Also in 1973, local artist Bess Bast was contracted to create 2 water dragon sculptures to place atop the pagoda to add to its authenticity. These dragons, called Shashihoko in Japanese mythology, are believed to protect the building they sit on from fire. Bast created the styrofoam molds, and C.J. Rhodes Foundry in Northmont cast them in metal. They were officially set into place in June of 1975. The pagoda was rededicated in July of 1973 and reopened for the first time in nearly 4 years. This included a new torii gate, which was designed in likeness of the original, which was taken down by the city when they acquired ownership in 1911. Chi Yang Hong, owner of the Far East restaurant, obtained concession rights and operated a small cafeteria on the main floor. His new signature menu item was a hot dog topped with duck sauce. Also during the 70s, that age-old tradition of the pagoda blinking its lights at 9 o'clock p.m. on Christmas Eve to signal that Santa was nearby was revived. The tradition dated to the 1940s, but was abandoned for some time prior due to the electrical issues. Sound familiar? Speaking of, again, the exterior lighting was botched during the 1970s renovations. This time the contractor installed interior lights instead of exterior lights, and within a year they malfunctioned and were rendered unusable. This led to a lawsuit between the city and contractor. Yet again, the pagoda suffered a minor electrical fire in January of 1980, which damaged the northwest corner of eaves on the second floor. New neon lighting was again installed on the eaves by the end of the year. A concrete retaining wall was constructed at the parking area around the same time to replace some of the stone WPA project walls built 4 decades prior. In 1988, an Allentown-based development company announced plans to build a 250-seat restaurant adjacent to the pagoda and have a bridge between the two structures. That never came to fruition. The building continued to deteriorate, and by 1991, it again needed work to the tune of nearly $1 million. These renovations ended up costing $2 million and were completed in May of 1994. By 2003, citizens again called for the city to repaint and replace roof tiles. Patty Pagoda's appearance became a local Groundhog's Day tradition in 2006. In 2008, the building went through yet another $1.5 million overhaul, which included new LED strip lighting replacing the old neon tubes. These would be the last significant renovations made. The pagoda celebrated its 100th birthday that year. It continued operations until the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, in which it closed and has not since reopened. An assessment was done on the property and stone retaining walls in 2023, which provided the scope of repairs that needed to be done before reopening. The bell that hangs on the top floor observation area was cast in 1739 in Hanno, Japan. Whitman bought the piece from an importer when he was constructing the pagoda. It is inscribed with Japanese characters, which are the names of the bell's donors, and an end-of-world prophecy. The history of the bell and the way it was obtained is a story in itself, so I will be making that the subject of its own future video. If you think that all of this is beginning to sound like Groundhog's Day, you're right. New decade, same problems. If someone tries to tell you that the pagoda has been undermined by vandalism and other criminal activity, feel free to remind them that these are the same problems the city faced in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. In the 1950s, vandals broke in and destroyed $200 worth of recently made improvements to the top floor of the building. 2 teenagers were kidnapped while they were parked on Skyline Drive near the fire tower in August of 1969. They were then murdered near Dreamland Park. In 1974, someone set the exterior entry bathrooms on fire, which led to them being locked when the pagoda was closed. The entire mountain became a trash dumping ground in the 1990s, which cost the city hundreds of thousands to clean up. These struggles certainly aren't new. The most recent version came in the form of loud music and late-night nuisance for years at the expense of neighbors nearby. Last June, it all came to a head when a violent altercation between dirt bikers and a cop was caught on camera and quickly published for the entire world to gawk at. It kicked off an initiative to gate off Skyline Drive between the fire tower and Angora Road between dawn and dusk. Things have been quiet since that incident in June, and the gate system is in the process of being implemented. Lots of people love and ask about the penny press. Our plan was to put this in City Hall for the duration of construction. I'm not sure that that's happened yet, so follow the pagoda's social media pages to be informed of where this ends up. Conservation and preservation should always be the priority on Mount Penn. Historically, whenever the pagoda requires money, there are those who call for the city to rid themselves of the burden of having to care for it by either tearing it down or selling it to a private entity. Tearing down one of the most unique structures in the country, one so symbolic of our area, is just as asinine a thought as it was during World War II. Even suggesting its sale is short-sighted and would be a complete disregard to Mould's intent of that land belonging to the public. That said, there does need to be a way forward with the pagoda sustaining itself and not creating a financial burden every decade. This is no easy feat, as the building itself comes with limitations. The pagoda's footprint is 50 feet by 28 feet, which isn't a whole lot of space. The first two floors, which have the largest capacity, equate to less than 2,800 usable square feet combined. Navigating what revenue-generating options can realistically occupy the space has always been the challenge. It seems that figuring out how to properly utilize the structure has consistently fallen short. We are hoping to change that. Construction will tentatively be commencing in early 2025 and set to last a few years. All right, before we wrap this up, let's go check out the basement. The first thing you see when you come down the stairs is the building's original safe. It seems today it's used merely as a storage closet. Throughout this video, I have showed you some of the cosmetic things inside that need to be addressed, but the bulk of the work to be done here is a completely new HVAC system, plumbing system, and electrical system. All of these essential systems need to be updated to accommodate the amount of traffic the pagoda gets as a tourist destination. The expected cost of these upgrades to the building is around $5 million. Bids have been awarded to the Warco Group for mechanical, Hernison Electrical, and Dolan Construction for the general contractor. Here's a third Shashahoko statue, just like the two on the top of the pagoda. Our plan as the foundation is to have it restored and displayed when the pagoda reopens. The Torii Gate is also something we are looking into having restored. My plan is to thoroughly document the construction process and use my platform and communication abilities to keep the public informed on what is being done. The second phase of the project will be raising $7+ million to reinforce the stone retaining walls. It should be noted that the walls are not currently at risk for failing, but they are aging and will need to be addressed in the coming years for guaranteed longevity into the future. The pagoda is weaved into the cultural fabric of Berks County. Its legacy belongs solely to no one, not the Japanese, not even Jonathan Wold or William Abbott Whitman. It belongs to all of us collectively, as it has, within its lifespan, endured all of the ebbs and flows of uncertain times with us alongside it. We trudge forward with times no less uncertain, yet like those who came before us, it is ours to protect in this moment.